So first thing is a housekeeping thing. The class is now closed to crashers. It closed last week. So if you're here hoping to crash, even though Gold shows spots, unfortunately we won't be able to let you in because the course is 20% over. So the other thing is I've been doing some, okay. It's funny we have closed captioning down there too. I'll remove that, don't worry. I've been doing some soul searching about the format of this course. So this is the third year that it's been taught. And the first 2 years, we had exclusively remote people coming in with Zoom. And they were all live. And as you know, if you were here on Wednesday, we had an actual in-person speaker. So I've thought about experimenting. In a minute, I'm going to ask you by way of the iClicker whether you like that or not. So I've thought about, because of that, experimenting with different ways of doing it. And one of the issues is for someone like this, Vandana Shiva, who's amazing, I don't know her personally. I'm having trouble contacting her. Also, she's in India, so it would be quite late there. It's like 10 p.m. or so now. So what I'm going to do today is show you a pre-recorded interview with her. And you'll see the video quality is much better than what I would have done here, someone just zooming in from their home computer. And the questions are quite good. It only lasts for 45 minutes, so this is an experiment today. If you have questions on anything she's saying and generally on what she's saying, ask them to me in the Q&A, and I will attempt to answer on her behalf. So, and maybe at the end I'll give a little overview as to why we're having her here in this class, but mainly just as a sort of beginning of that, I don't want this to be a California or Western-centric course. It's never been that way. In fact, the first year we had Shrishti Bajpai, who was an activist from India, zoom into the course. It had technical problems and all, which is one of the reasons we're going this way. But I want to give you different perspectives, especially because the view that we have of the climate crisis is fundamentally different in other parts of the world, principally in low to moderate income countries. Totally different. And you're going to hear Dr. Shiva really lay into people like Bill Gates and why it's a problem, and also being pretty critical of those of us in wealthy countries. Because here's the fact. There's one fact. I guarantee you this is going to show up on the midterm, so pay attention to it. And if you've had English 23, you know we started with a whole paper on this. And that is, we call this anthropogenic climate change, and that means human-caused climate change. There's some debate on that because people who deny the climate crisis would like to say it's not being caused by human beings. But if you've heard the statistic, 97% of all climate scientists agree that it is being caused by human beings. And in fact, the new number, that number's from over a decade ago, the new number is like 99.9% of all climate scientists agree that it's human-caused. But I wouldn't just say anthropogenic because that misses the point. And here's the point, here's the fact, I guarantee you'll show up on the midterm. The wealthiest 1% of humanity is contributing 2/3 of all greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. I'll repeat that. The wealthiest 1% is contributing 2/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. If they were all out of the scene, and if it was just the 99%, there wouldn't be a climate crisis. The needle would hardly be moving. We wouldn't have any of these impacts that we're having. And unfortunately, many of those 1% live in the United States, and they live in wealthy, countries across the planet. And you may not be in one of the wealthiest 1%, but if you're here in this classroom, you're probably like in the 10%, and you're a major problem. And the rest of the world is aware of this. So I'll give you another fact. I have to decide if I put this on the midterm, but here it is. The poorest half of humanity, so there are 8 billion people on the planet, the poorest half would be the poorest 4 billion. They've contributed less than 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So they're not causing the problem at all. We wouldn't even be talking about it, we wouldn't even be able to measure it in terms of any consequences at this point. So the rest of the world, the way they look at the problem is very different from the way that we look at it, because they look at us, quite rightly, as the problem. So I think it's important not just to hear from a bunch of Western scholars, but to hear from a perspective that clearly sees what the problem is and clearly sees that the problem is being caused not by human beings generally, but by a very small percentage of human beings. Historically, and if you've been in my classes before, you know this number I'm about to throw out, a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions were put there by the United States. So the United States, if you connect those numbers I just said, we put a quarter of emissions there, and the poorest half of the planet only put 10%. We put 2.5 times more greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere than the poorest half of the planet. And that's astonishing. And that is, at core, a profound justice and equity issue. So when we talk about environmental justice or climate justice, there it is. It's the huge equity and justice issue. And we say justice, but what we really mean, it's an injustice problem. There's profound injustice to what I just said. Okay, so we'll talk about this more. If you have already opening thoughts on that, go to the Q&A in Canvas for lecture number 5. It's now open. Put your questions in. This is going to run for like 45 minutes. When it's over, I will address those questions. But before I do, I want to take an iClicker poll, but I want to do it differently from the way we normally do it, because if I click over here, I now have an actual iClicker question. So as you may know, during the others, up to this point, you just click anything A through E. But now, hold on, I have to move this. Will you come over here? Yeah, cool. Now I want you to actually put A through E so we can get an idea. So if you were here last time, did you prefer having a live guest? And that was T.A. Barron, who sat here with me on the stage. Or did you prefer having someone Zoom in, like Kim Stanley Robinson or Sarah for the first class? So there it is. I'm curious. I will initiate this now, if I can get my cursor over here. Okay. As usual, you have 1 minute and 26 seconds. Please respond. And as we get enough, I will actually go ahead and show you the responses here. Because I'm curious myself. And we can change the course in some ways. It's harder to get people here. Tom Barron just happens to have been down in the LA area, because if you didn't get what he kind of hinted at, his Merlin series is now being developed into a motion picture, at least one, probably a multi-film deal by Sony Pictures, and the creative people behind Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings in different ways are contributing to it. So why do we only have 44 responses? So wait, one person here? What's happening, Shiva? It's not opening. Okay. Okay. Bear with me. We'll see if this works, or what I can do to make this work. Just hold on. Okay. All right. Let's see if I can. Hold on. Okay, so that didn't work. So, by the way, Dr. Shiva's lecture, hold on, but I wanted the previous question. And who knows if this will work, but let's try. Okay, try to respond. 8 people, 53. Looks like it's working. I'm more surprised than anything that I actually got that to work, or mystified why it didn't work last time, really. So enough people are responding. Let's see what people said. People do not prefer Zoom. Definitely either don't care one way or another, or somewhat, or definitely like live. Good to know, because I do intend to get more live people. Let's put that back. And since we didn't have it before, let me jump to my next question, and we'll do Zoom again on this. So which interview, I want to explain it before I activate the Q&A, or the Zoom iClicker. Which did you find most beneficial? The pre-recorded that we did today, that would be Dr. Shiva. Do you definitely or somewhat like it? Do you not care? Or do you prefer the Zoom format? So in the last question, I was asking you to compare live and Zoom. Now I'm asking you to compare Zoom and this pre-recorded format. So let's see what people like. Oh, we will let this one finish just in case someone didn't get it. Yeah, see, someone's there counting down. And then I do want to talk about, if you have questions, by the way, put them in the Q&A for number 5, lecture 5. It already has quite a few great questions there. So we are now doing the iClicker again. And the question is, what did you like more, the pre-recorded today or the Zoom? 500 people, boy, we can definitely see what folks said. And yeah, pre-recorded Zoom, gosh, pretty similar, a little more for Zoom, but not so much. I mean, the pre-recorded has better quality and all, I think, but, all right, I'll think about that. So let's just leave this here. I will do one more before we end. And okay, and why don't I throw myself up over here? If I can shrink down a little. Whoops. Okay, so questions. People had a number, so we'll spend the rest of the time with those. And people ask questions squarely on the mark here. So first one is, could we somehow use our greenhouse gas emissions and harvest them, like to use, by the way, people should be quiet now, like food waste or factory emissions and turn that into energy? People are still talking. We're on the lecture thing. So like to use corn to produce energy, produce ethanol for energy. I'm asking so we don't have to reduce our manufacturing, but will nonetheless reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, and this goes to what Dr. Shiva said, in that you will find plenty of people telling you yes. You can do things like grow corn, produce ethanol out of it, and you can fuel cars with it. We are doing it in some states. 10% of all the fuel you're pumping in at a gas station is not oil, but ethanol. If you look at all the statistics and all the studies in the last 20 years, it's a very bad idea. Especially the fact we have, more than 1 billion people on the planet, starving. To be using those crops to then produce energy just isn't going to work. Also, the idea that you can somehow take these emissions and either store them underground or make them into fuel, that's pretty much pie in the sky, insofar as either the technologies don't exist or they're just prohibitively expensive. And the real notion here that we can somehow reduce manufacturing and reduce emissions at the same time is just not going to work. It's a wonderful idea. It is sold to us by the industries, like fossil fuel industries, industry, but there's no expectation. And if you look at the actual climate scientists working on it, you will categorically see that's the case. Sometimes the IPCC says we should continue to investigate those technologies, but for the most part, no. And there's a wonderful TED Talk by Al Gore. Maybe I'll even show it here if we do more of this pre-recorded format, addressing this and why it won't work. So next general question, do you think that society will be able to culturally return to more localized markets considering we have had global markets, specifically for agriculture for decades? For regions of the world that have specialized in agriculture to shift to other places, how would they recover and move forward? In other words, parts of the world are using agriculture as an export. Dr. Shiva talks about one of the most famous ones. You probably don't think about it, but you're involved in this trade probably in a big way. Why? Cotton. If you buy something and you say, well, I don't want to get like an artificial fabric, I want to get cotton, even better organic cotton, where's a lot of that being grown? In India. It's been shifted to India to do it. The problem with that is India needs their land to produce food for India's population of 1.4 billion people. So we've, in essence, we don't like to think of it this way. We want to think that the colonial era is over. But the colonial era is alive and well in an economic sense, that we've colonized, those of us in wealthy parts of the world, places like India to use their agricultural production to produce things like cotton for us. This takes an enormous amount of their resources, human and natural resources, to do, an enormous amount of water. Cotton requires incredible amounts of water. But if it wasn't bad enough, and this is what Dr. Shiva is going on about, companies like Monsanto have gone in there and introduced GMOs. GMOs, of course, are genetically modified organisms. You may not know this, but if you think, well, I don't like GMOs, I don't want to eat GMOs, I don't want to be around GMOs, well, forget that. Because over 90% of the corn in the United States, wheat in the United States, rice that you're eating is all genetically modified. So it's a very good chance you have GMO food in your body right now, and it's a very good chance you have genetically modified cotton on you right now, because as Dr. Shiva noted in the talk, 95% of all cotton in India is genetically modified. So companies like Monsanto sell those seeds to the farmers. They set the price for it. The farmers have to buy them to get an increased yield. And, you know, Monsanto then has a real monopoly on it. And what she was talking about with that, the idea of Roundup, Roundup is an herbicide. It is used to kill weeds. So if you put cotton in the ground, cotton's not going to be very competitive against the weeds, localized weeds that could grow up and compete with it. What they do is, before they put it in the ground, they dose it with Roundup, which is a herbicide, kills all the weeds. Then they put the seeds in, then they dose it again, because, as she notes, they've stacked up. Not only is the cotton more productive, but it's resistant to Roundup. Roundup is being sold by the same company that is doing the seeds. And what she notes even more, Roundup is a problem now because Roundup is now owned by Bayer, which is the company that owns like Bayer aspirin and all. So they're a pharmaceutical company, and they're making people sick with this. But then they're they're coming with medicines to solve it. It's a horrible form of colonialization, and it's everywhere. It's all over. So, if, for example, you like avocados are great. They're healthy. People tell you to eat them. In fact, a person has a question regarding that coming up. A lot of our avocados, if they're off season here, and if you want to eat them all year round, they're coming from places like Chile. Same problem. Chile, avocados take a ton of water. Chile is using a great portion of its land to grow them, a great amount of water to feed those trees, and they don't have it for local agriculture. So could the world rebound if they stopped selling these things to us, if they didn't have the debt that they did? Absolutely, they could. And that's Dr. Shiva's argument, that what we need to do is go back to local food systems where your food was coming locally. As you may know, if you've been in other classes, I quote the fact that the average food that you eat, whether it's a fruit or vegetable on your table, it's traveled on average 1,500 miles to get there. That's the way the global food system works. Even in a place like Idaho, famous for its potatoes, if you buy potatoes in Idaho, they probably probably weren't grown in Idaho. Everything is shifted around. It's an enormous amount of energy to transport, especially if it's going, globally around. So local ways will be better, but we have to reshift our thinking toward them. And why we wouldn't do that? Because we see it as impractical, but also if you look at Monsanto or the companies involved, they're all profiting from it. And what Dr. Shiva argues, of course, is seeds should be free. Seeds should be available to everyone. Monsanto shouldn't have patents on seeds. So next question, how can you have a legally binding international agreement like the Rio Agreement that Dr. Shiva mentions, or I would mention COP21, the Paris Agreement, if there isn't an international organization that can actually enforce it? It's a really good question. So how does climate work? 2015 Paris Agreement, Paris Accord, wonderful agreement insofar as it laid out exactly what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, that was 2015. They said in the Paris Agreement, you have to reduce emissions in half by 2030. The problem is the organizations involved, like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, does not have any enforcement agency. The COP21 did not have any enforcement. The Paris Agreement doesn't. So all the countries, over 190 countries of planet Earth agreed to do it, and none of them are doing it. And how can I tell you that? Because that was 2015, we're more than halfway through to 2030, right? And have emissions gone down since then? No. Have emissions leveled off since then? No. Emissions, in fact, are increasing. Are they increasing just a little? No, they're increasing more than they've ever been. So that is the real thing here. We need an actual strong enforcement mechanism. And until we get that, regardless of what people or countries agree to, that's a problem. So next question. That's a really good one here. We've been told outside of class. I like that outside of class because I've never told anyone this, but I'm going to venture a guess where this person says this. We've been told outside of class that the most effective solution to climate change and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is going vegan or to stop using animal products. The question goes on, but I'll stop that right there. Where have you heard that? Well, maybe a film like Cowspiracy. I show that in other classes, but I talk about it. The guy in that Cowspiracy who produced it and is the star of it, Kip Anderson, is flat out lying in that film. He says that 51% of greenhouse gas emissions come from animal products. It's nowhere near that much. It's more like 15%. He's going by a very old WHO study from over 15 years ago now that has been proven to just be wrong. And it's also a vast, vast oversimplification to think that just using largely animal products solves anything. So I'll give you an example. If you eat something like asparagus, well, you might think asparagus is an animal product, is a vegetable, it's healthy, it's really healthy, it's really good. I like asparagus. But if you get asparagus in the winter, and here in California, that asparagus doesn't grow locally in California in the winter, it doesn't grow nearby like in Mexico in the winter, it has to come from South America, or other parts of the global South. Principally South America, though, and because asparagus doesn't last very long, like bananas, you can ship them by boat because it takes them a while to ripen. Asparagus will go bad pretty quickly. It's flown in. So if you're getting asparagus in the winter, flown from a place like Chile, the carbon footprint of that asparagus will be more than chicken. So you might think, oh, I'm eating vegetables, it's better for the planet. No, not necessarily. As Dr. Shiva notes, if you eat something like the Impossible Burger and all, the new studies coming out showing the energy used to make it and all is through the roof. Does that mean that, and more than some meats, does that mean that you should not do it? No, you should, but we need to look really carefully at how we're doing it, and you really can't do that well personally, at least in the United States right now. As I've noted in other classes, in places like Denmark, they are now putting putting food labels on that have that. So if you buy food in the store, you look and you can see these are the amount of calories, fat, or whatever. And why are you doing that? Because you're trying to think, is this going to be a healthy thing for my body? In Denmark, they're putting on a label, is this going to be a healthy thing for the planet? So if you pick up a package of asparagus, you can see if it has a very low carbon footprint, if it's grown locally, or if it's super high because it's flown in. But to continue with this question, this person thought, well, maybe I thought vegan would solve everything. However, based on Dr. Shiva, it seems that even our crop farming industry is heavily flawed and contributes largely to global warming. Yes, it does. So again, it's this great oversimplification, and then the person asked the question, how are we to decide what to eat to minimize our individual carbon footprint if there's a right answer with our current industries and society? It's very hard. It requires a great deal of research. But I could also tell you that this fundamental mindset that you get from something like Cowspiracy is wrong. And this is a shock, but just to say it, you going vegan, and let me be honest, I have skin in the game. I was vegan for 5 years. I'm vegetarian now. I think it's great. But going vegan is not going to change. You going vegan won't change anything at all. It won't move the dial. You might actually raise your individual carbon emissions. But why? Because you're one of 8 billion people. It's not going to move the needle a little. If you want to do anything now to abate the climate crisis, it needs to be collective action. It's not that food system isn't great, but you all got together, 800 people in the room, and tried to make us at UCSB a largely plant-based campus. People have been trying to do that. If you know Renan Leroux is a professor in the French department, he's trying to do it. If you could collectively stop UCSB from having meat on campus, whether in the dining halls or over in the arbor or at the subway, that would make a difference, because that wouldn't be one person, it'd be 20,000 people. It might influence the rest of the UC, and you might be talking hundreds of thousands of people, and it might influence people for the rest of their lives to stay with a largely plant-based diet. The point is, individual action is great, but it is not doing anything. Even if you're a Cardassian, you fly around in an airplane all the time, that's not individually much, but collectively, that's where it's at. So anyhow, let me go back here and do our last poll here, see if I can do it. So which Q&A format did you prefer? So in other words, the live Q&A where you actually got to ask Kim Stanley Robinson, or the one we just had. So it kind of goes to the question. Okay, there you go. Answer that and you can go. I think we'll do pre-recorded on Wednesday to get an idea of how this approach works. So, in case you're curious, Zoom. Okay, pre-recorded maybe more liked than Zoom. We'll see.